What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. We're dealing with technical gremlins and hacker attacks and everything, so sorry for all the interruptions and the noise going on here. So it is Thursday, May 11th, 2017. Sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy it's Thursday. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, the Democrats are still going ballistic and about, the president fired the FBI director. Like it doesn't happen. It has happened in the past. In fact, the last president to do it was President Bill Clinton. The day before, Vince Foster's body was found at Fort Marcy Park. So these things do happen. The media is trying to make a big deal over Trump's comment that he was thinking about firing James Comey even without the recommendations of the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General, and they're out there saying, see, he lied about why he fired, he's lying, the whole media, the whole liberal establishment, they're on a warpath, and I can imagine why. They're absolutely scared out of their mind about what is about to happen here. And the double standards and hypocrisy is just amazing. Maxine Waters, who's out there saying Trump shouldn't have fired Comey, and somebody asked, well, if Hillary had won the election, how would you feel about her firing Comey? And Maxine Waters said, well, after all the things Comey did to her, of course it would be okay for Hillary to fire. It's just not okay for Trump to fire. And so, again, they're just totally thinking partisan politics. They're not actually thinking what's right or wrong. And I got to tell you, a government, a Congress that is this caught up in the partisan bickering is a Congress that cannot effectively do their job. And that is something to definitely want to keep in mind when you wonder why the nation continues to deteriorate. Now, former Assistant Director of the FBI, James Kallstrom, in an interview over at Breitbart News, says that James Comey has thrown the reputation of the FBI under the bus. Well, I wouldn't put it entirely on Comey because you remember Kallstrom was a major figure in the FBI's helping to cover up the accidental shoot-down of TWA 800. And Kallstrom figured very, very prominently in that. In fact, if you remember how Kallstrom went after James Sanders and trying to keep control of all the evidence. So, yes, Comey brought disrepute to the FBI, but he's continuing a long and ignoble tradition, as it were. So, basically, here we are right now. The FBI faked its Hillary Clinton investigation. Comey granted blanket immunity to all the Clinton staffers, never bothered to examine the Clinton campaign computers, never made a stink over how the email server was basically scrubbed. Comey covered up the entire D.C. swamp from the President, Congress, and the American people. Yes, he should have gone. Now, here's another earthquake about to happen. Trump is not stopping with Comey, because apparently Attorney General Sessions and Deputy Attorney General are basically looking to replace McCabe as the acting FBI chief until a successor can be named. So McCabe is now in the crosshairs. And that makes sense because Andrew McCabe shielded Hillary Clinton while his wife took $675,000 from a Clinton ally for her political run. And McCabe hid this on his financial disclosure forms. So McCabe is totally compromised. Now, somebody put up a White House petition, appoint Trey Gowdy to replace James Comey as director of the FBI. I was a little disappointed when I went on over there that hardly anybody had signed it, or maybe they're trying to basically make it look like nobody's signing it. But we've seen a lot more action on some, frankly, silly petitions, and this one's hardly moving. It doesn't really matter anyway, because the good news is, according to the Political Insider, Trey Gowdy is at the top of the list of people being considered for the new head of the FBI, and amazingly, he's getting some bipartisan support. And apparently, Bakari Sellers, he's a former Democratic member of the South Carolina State House, and now he's a commentator on CNN, tweeted out that he would support Trey Gowdy as the new director of the FBI. Now, we've all been watching Trey Gowdy for a long, long time. The guy just comes across as a straight shooter. He's not interested in political turf and protection. He has done a great deal of good in trying to drag out some of what's been going on behind the scenes. Mostly he gets ignored by the corporate media, but of course he's a star out here in the independent media. And possibly as a means of fighting. See, we're seeing a war between two ideas, okay, or two investigations rather. The first one is into Hillary Clinton's email server, whether she was committing espionage, whether the Clinton Foundation was a slush fund, for which there's a huge amount of evidence. And on the other side, the Democrats are still pushing Russia, 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 even though there is no evidence to back it up at all. And so now, Maine's Senator Angus King wants to hire former FBI Director Jim Comey to lead a quote-unquote independent investigation into ties between Trump and the Russian government. Can you say conflict of interest? If they were actually to do that, anything Comey comes up with, people are going to say, well, he's just out for revenge. He's just out for revenge. Now, there's a new breaking story. First of all, we're going to do a shout-out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And there's a new breaking story. You're going to love this one. This one came out of 12160.info, and it involves a Russian citizen who is a hacker, Yevgeny Nikulin, 29 years old, and apparently he was caught hacking servers like LinkedIn, Dropbox, and FormSpring between 2012 and 2013, and he got arrested for it. And now Nikulin has gone public through his lawyer saying that agents of the FBI visited him while waiting for his trial, offering to get all the charges dropped, grant him U.S. citizenship, a pile of cash, and an apartment in the United States if Nikulin would confess, quote-unquote, to participating in the 2016 hacks of Clinton campaign chief John Podesta's emails last July. Now, we all know that was a leak. We're pretty sure Seth Rich leaked it. Assange sort of hinted at that. And here we have the FBI trying to bribe somebody to stand up and say, yes, I'm the one who hacked the DNC emails on behalf of Russia. They were trying to bribe him. U.S. citizenship, a pile of cash. Yeah, that's what the FBI does. And probably because of this and so many other things going all the way back to COINTELPRO, Ron Paul is out there saying, good that Comey's been fired. Now you should fire the entire FBI. Because you have to ask, has the FBI actually been a benefit to our liberty and safety, or are they in fact acting as an American version of the Gestapo to enforce the will of the rulers? Cover up murders, make them look like suicides, wreck the careers of anybody who points out the very bad mistakes they make in the cover stories. All right, we're going to take some phone calls. Lynn in Illinois, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How are you? It's so good to talk to you. I want to tell you thank you for your time and energy. You do a great job.
Thank you.
And I agree with probably 98% of what you say. You're spot on.
Thank you.
Love it. Now, I was listening last night, and someone called in and spoke about Convention of States, and you said you were for it, and you guys talked a little bit, and I just wanted to say a little bit more about it, if I could.
Yes, please.
Okay, so the Convention of States is not where they open up the United States Constitution to rewriting the Constitution. It is where the states get together and think of amendments to the Constitution. They're not going to rewrite the Constitution, only amend it. Okay, so a lot of people that are fearful that it's going to rewrite it's not a constitutional convention.
That's correct.
Yes, and it's a very long process, so it is safe in that aspect. You need 34 states to pass a bill asking for this convention. After that, let's say you come up with a couple of amendments. They have to go back to the states and pass again in 38 states to become an amendment on the U.S. Constitution.
That is correct.
Now, so far, we have 11 states that have passed the bill asking for the convention. It has to go through the House and the Senate of that state in the same year to pass. We have 11 that have passed. Just last week, Texas passed. We have about 15 other states that have passed either the House or the Senate in one given year. So and we're active in 44 of 50 states. So we're moving right along. We have a lot of support, and just wanted to mention it, and hopefully your listeners will go online and sign the petition.
Okay, well, if there's any information that you can send me a URL, email it to me, and I will link it to whatreallyhappened.com.
Oh, fabulous. All right, keep up the good work.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here and switch over to Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha, Errol. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I just want to make it quick. It's about the Americans, they have an unipolar world, and what we see now with the BRICS countries, it's a multipolar world, so with an M, multipolar and unipolar. What we don't see in the Americans when we want to do business is that the Americans want to be first.
Yes.
And that the multipolarization means we want to do business with each other. A unipolar world means only me.
Yes.
But a multipolar world means for everyone. So when we can step off this plate of irony, I call it irony, because when you look in history, all we did was we were the ones that put on the bombs. We placed the bombs. We did it. We did this, that, und so weiter, ne? In German, yeah.
Well,
but when we look in the future, we need to go to a multipolar world, and a multipolar world means doing business with each other, without warfare, without nuclear warfare, without whatever warfare, craziest ideas. And you know it.
Oh, I understand, but let me step back and give you a little bit of history, because following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States government began to view itself as the world's remaining superpower, based on their military expenditures in the nuclear arsenal, and literally embarked on a program called the Project for the New American Century, to basically bring the rest of the world under the hegemonic domination of the United States, both economically through the Federal Reserve Note and militarily as well. And unfortunately, way too many people within the U.S. government still see the U.S. as a superpower among a bunch of nations who can't stand up to us. But as you said, the situation has evolved, and we have all these other nations who are forming alliances that together really do match the United States economically, potentially even militarily, because we're beginning to realize that the image of invincible American military might may be more illusion than reality. And so the rest of the world, I think, sees the United States correctly as an empire in decline, and no longer a leader, certainly not a moral leader, certainly not a champion of human rights, but as a rogue nation with a lot of very nasty weapons, and that's about it. So I think the reality is the world has already gone back to being multipolar, and the U.S. government's just a little slow on the pickup.
You can say that now, exactly, yes. But what Paul Craig Roberts said, they are sitting in the situation room, and they think that they can still win this. And that's the dangerous thing about it.
I agree with you. I mean, Paul Craig Roberts, you have to take him seriously when you look at his background. And when he says he's hearing that the U.S. government is seriously considering first nuclear strikes against Russia and China, and being able to bluff them into not retaliating, that is very, very dangerous and reckless thinking. You just have to wonder, is there something in the water supply over there at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C.? Because that's a tremendous gamble to be making with our entire nation.
Yeah. And what I said to my mother, I always said to my mother, you have got always children from any, how do you call it? You got children from any ages. So you got children, and that means when you got children from any ages, they could be 11, 12, 13, and they are sitting in such sort of rooms, and then making such decisions. That's very dangerous.
It is.
Anyways, Mike, thank you for my call.
Thank you for the call, and we're going to switch over to Bob in Las Vegas. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Great to hear from Errol. I compare the situation today to what happened in the Soviet Union. I feel like we are now the new Soviet Union, and it was the satellites, Eastern Europe, that broke away from the Soviet Union first, and that eventually led to the downfall, the collapse of the Soviet Union. Europe is so important. Paul Craig Roberts stresses this. It's these European vassals that are so important. They give Washington cover for their reckless hegemonic policies. If Europe pulled away and stopped giving Washington the cover that they need to pursue these policies, the U.S., these policies would stop. This deep state would collapse. So once again, it's sort of like the Hungarians, the East Germans. They led to the Soviet collapse first,
along with the loss of Afghanistan. Because
right, along with the loss of Afghanistan as well. But
it was losing Afghanistan that shattered the myth of Soviet military superiority. It showed that, again, they weren't as powerful and invincible as the reputation was, and I think we're going through the same thing here with all these quagmires the U.S. is stuck in and cannot get out of. And again, this is all patterned after the fall of Rome. After Rome lost those 3 legions up in Germany, the outlying provinces said, oh, Rome isn't as strong and powerful as we were led to believe. Let's just go off and try and be independent. And Britain broke away, and Rome started having to pull on back. And without that plunder and pillage from the outlying provinces, Rome couldn't sustain its debt, and eventually it simply collapsed.
Yeah, Mike, to change the subject, I just have some free advice to the Japanese government regarding Fukushima. If they, in order to encourage people to return to their homes in Fukushima, why not move a few government ministries there first? Maybe that'll encourage the people to go back to Fukushima.
Oh, and I think Japan's energy ministry ought to be right there on the site.
Absolutely. And then last thing, Mike. Oh, by the way, what does Palawana Friday say? You always say that on Wednesday.
Oh, Pau Hana Friday. It's Hawaiian for end of work.
Oh, end of work. Okay. Last thing, people were talking about the Putin meeting. Putin meets Kissinger every year for talks.
Yes. And
I don't think that they're friends. Actually, a good friend of mine my Greek buddy in New Jersey, Andy, he said, it's perhaps Putin is taking a page out of Michael Corleone's book. Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, Kissinger is still very much at the core of all the deep state plotting, and I imagine Putin would want to know what he's thinking.
Absolutely.
As he gallivants around the world.
Oh, Mike, lastly, was that elevator at Sears fixed? Because you mentioned how Sears is just collapsing
we haven't been back
in your
there.
Town.
We haven't actually been back there, so I don't know.
Okay, I was wondering if they were that was leading to their closure. But
I think we're going to. Yeah, I think we're going to lose this local Sears, and I think we're going to lose the local Macy's as well. All right, Bob, thanks an awful lot. We're going to take a break for commercials here. More phone calls when we come on back, and then getting on back to the news about how this transition at the FBI may lead to a reopening of the investigation into Hillary Clinton. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take another phone call. Jeff in Montana. Aloha. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Aloha, Michael. Thanks for taking the call. I agree with you completely. I think Trey Groudy's the perfect guy for the head of the FBI. Have you heard about him exhuming Vince Foster's body? Is that
no? That was a hoax. Somebody put that out as a hoax. You need to understand right now, the government and the corporate media are trying to find ways to make the independent media look kooky or just plain wrong. And there have been a number of brand new websites that have appeared in the last couple of weeks that are doing nothing but pouring junk on out there in the hope that we'll all pick it up, run with the story, and embarrass ourselves. And the original source story about exhuming Vince Foster's body, they had the wrong state. Because Vince Foster is actually buried back in Arkansas, and they were saying they're over there in Virginia and they're exhuming the body, and it was completely wrong. So, again, we have to be vigilant because the purveyors of fake news are trying to plant more fake news on the independent media to try and level the playing field. They're not going to reverse it. They're not going to win back the trust of the American people. What they're trying to do is sabotage the American people's trust in the independent media. So far, it's not working, but we do have to be careful. They're just flinging a lot of nonsense stuff out there.
Well, here's one thing that is, it is true, and I think is going to be a factor here going forward. I think you're seeing the beginning of Jeff Sessions and the AG's office getting down to who the real criminals are. And Comey was on the board of HSBC. He was involved with funding that was going back and forth to the Clinton Foundation. This guy, John Cruz, the senior VP that came out of HSBC and lost his job as a whistleblower, has fingered him as one of the guys that Sessions going after, including Loretta Lynch and Hillary and Eric Holder. And I think you're going to start seeing the Justice Department and an Attorney General really doing their job here. At least that's what I'm hoping.
Well, I'm hoping for it too, but you need to remember what they're up against ultimately is that CIA cocaine cartel that has corrupted our society for going on more than 30, going all the way back to Vietnam. They've been tinkering with this stuff. And obviously, CIA is not going to tolerate anybody spoiling that party that they've got. So Sessions and whoever takes over the FBI, Trey Gowdy, and even Trump are going to have to be very, very careful because they're up against a lot of money and a lot of power. And everybody who was involved in this CIA operation, they're scared right now, and scared people can be very dangerous.
Right, and that's what they're doing with this whole Russia thing, is they're just trying to create any story that'll take these guys down, because they're scared of hanging by the noose, like Hillary said. Yeah,
absolutely. That's exactly what it is. They're trying to get rid of Trump. They're trying to find some way to shift the blame back on him. But again, even the people attacking Trump have to come back saying, well, we don't actually have any evidence, you know. But it just makes sense that Putin would be rigging the election for Trump, except all the election fraud that has been documented from last year's election all favored Hillary Clinton. So the story, again, it just doesn't hold up.
All right, thanks, Mike. Have a good day.
All right, thanks. We're going to switch over to John in Phoenix. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I'm one of the unemployed in the country. I'm a psychologist. The way I see things set up right now, the only way I can see them actually fixing the unemployment program is putting more people on antidepressants, manufacturing more Roundup or vaccines, bring back the draft, or put more malware on people's software.
Yeah, that unfortunately seems to be some of the thinking here is let's go out and cause problems, and then people will have jobs fixing the problems. It's called the broken window analogy, but our nation's run out of windows.
Well, do you have any suggestions that could bring back unemployment besides just causing problems that need to be fixed that they create?
Yeah, let's stop going around the world killing people. And let's retask that money back to the development of our nation. I mean, there are things that need to be done, especially with the infrastructure. And there are people who want to have those jobs. But right now, the money is just siphoned off for war, Israel, and all of this international intrigue. We're living in a wartime economy. They don't want to admit it, but that's the reality. And you can tell just by walking down your local street, looking at the cracked pavement, the corroded fixtures, the empty retail spaces, and all the homeless people. We'll tell you what the reality is that's going on. John, we're going to let you go and take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And by the way, if you're trying to reach the whatreallyhappened.com website, it is under extremely heavy hacker attack today, which may signal that something major is about to happen, or the children are just in a panic mode here right now. And they ought to be. They ought to be. Because as one example, I mean, calls to investigate Hillary gained steam following Comey's firing. Everybody knew James Comey and Loretta Lynch were protecting Hillary Clinton from prosecution, even as James Comey listed the Title 18 felony violations she's actually guilty of. And so, yeah, remember, Donald Trump campaigned, at least in part, on prosecuting the Clintons for all that they have done. And now's the time to make good on that particular promise. Now, apparently, with Comey now gone, and possibly the acting director about to be given a pink slip, we're starting to hear from a lot of FBI agents, rank and file. They were furious at the investigation. They knew it was a cover-up. And we're hearing rumblings that FBI agents are going to start leaking stuff. They're going to talk, and they're very angry over the fact that when they went to interview Hillary Clinton at her home, all they did was talk to her. They didn't take any devices. They didn't search the residence. They didn't do anything. They were just going through the motions to make it look like there was an investigation, and there wasn't. And FBI agents are very, very angry that their public image has been seriously damaged by a very obvious cover-up. Because it's one thing to cover something up like the murder of Vince Foster, and the vast majority of Americans don't realize that's what happened. And quite another to be covering up for Hillary Clinton's email server and foundation, and everybody in the country knows that's exactly what happened. Politics is perception, and the perception is Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and their associates are guilty of a great number of crimes, including possibly betraying our nation, and they should be held to account. Tom Fitton, over at Judicial Watch, is saying one of the problems that he had with James Comey back during that press conference where he listed out all the information and said, we're not charging, is he violated all the standard procedures, saying Comey acted like judge, jury, and prosecutor, and that was never his job. Comey's job was to collect together all the information, give it to the Department of Justice, and let them make the call, not make a TV press conference where he says, this is what happened, and I have decided we're not going to recommend charges. And if you look at the letter from the Assistant Attorney General, that's a big point in there, why the Assistant AG was saying, you've got to let this guy go. He's a wild card. He doesn't really understand the job, which makes sense when you realize James Comey has never had much of a law enforcement background. He's a banker and apparently a money launderer. Now, speaking of Judicial Watch, they have scored another major victory. They were requesting more of the emails from the State Department. The State Department refused, saying none of your business. And Judicial Watch took them to court under the Freedom of Information Act request, and the judge said, you will turn over the emails. They have 894 pages of new State Department documents, including previously unreleased email exchanges, and these email exchanges reinforce Hillary Clinton repeatedly violated the laws regarding the handling of classified information. And remember, James Comey's claim that we're not going to prosecute because we couldn't find that she intended to do wrong doesn't pass muster. Title 18 does not require intent to do wrong. It's gross negligence. It's the act of exposing the classified information to a non-secure environment. That's the crime. Not what you meant to do. What you did is what actually happened. And Comey tried the same thing to get Huma Abedin off the hook. And that was just one too many. And we know Hillary broke the law. That we've got all the evidence that's already come on out. There was that one message where she literally instructed a subordinate to remove the classification headings from a document and send it by non-secure means. That's a Title 18 violation right there. Now, Rand Paul has just asked Donald Trump to open a new probe into the Obama administration spying on political opponents during this last year's election. And I think that ought to be done. Donald Trump promised to drain the swamp. He's got a wonderful opportunity here. If he misses it, the swamp is going to find some way to eat him. Meanwhile, over at the Washington Compost, they're still out there just putting out stuff to try and cause problems. They actually ran a story earlier today where the Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein was reported as saying that he had objected to the firing of Comey, that he was considering leaving the Department of Justice. Rosenstein has now gone public saying, no, I am not quitting. I didn't threaten to quit over the Comey firing. It's just more made-up fake news from the Washington Compost. Now, over at CNN, Wolf Blitzer was interviewing Dianne Feinstein, and he gave her a direct question, is there any evidence now of collusion between Donald Trump and the Russian government? And Dianne Feinstein says, well, not at this time. And at that point, Wolf just ends the interview because that's not what he wanted. He wanted Feinstein to say, oh, yes, there's lots of evidence. We can't share it with you or whatever the other stuff. But Feinstein came on out and said, no, there is no evidence of collusion between Donald Trump and the Russian government. And that wasn't what Wolf Blitzer wanted to hear. You should have seen his face. Actually, the video's up there. You can take a look at it. And here is something that is going to make the Democrats and the deep state really, 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 really nervous. Donald Trump is about to sign an executive order establishing a bipartisan presidential advisory commission to look into voting integrity in this country. Long, long overdue. And if anybody from the Trump administration is listening to this show here, you need to get in touch with Bev Harris over at blackboxvoting.org. She ought to be on that commission. I'd love to be on that commission. I know how to make our elections a lot more honest than they are right now. But all of a sudden, we're starting to see the Donald Trump that we actually voted for. And being the cautious and cynical type, I'm not ready to say that happy days are here again. But these are all good signs. It's almost like Donald Trump, the first 100 days, he was dealing with all this complexity, and all of a sudden he's saying, okay, I got things sorted out here. We're going to start moving forward on these things. Okay, we're going to take a phone call here. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, just wanted to say that your drug theory, MENA, CIA, drug laundering and all that, I think it goes, you can take it one step further and say that, like, for instance, Comey was a bank director and a banker. The banks were strong enough, really, to get Comey into director of FBI. Just like the deep state parts that are strong enough to promise Jane Harmon, chairman of the Intelligence Committee, or things like that. But we got to get the banks. I mean, the drug launderers, all that. It goes through the banks, and it goes through the Federal Reserve. It's the seat of everything from drugs and money laundering to LIBOR and kicking millions of people out of their home and repossessing their homes on fraudulent mortgages. Everything. It's the seat of all evil. And Trump could use the RICO laws against them. He could surround the Federal Reserve, with an infantry battalion and then use the RICO laws, or at least make sure that they're audited then by force.
Well, I imagine that if Trump were to order a full audit of the Federal Reserve, there'd be a mysterious fire almost immediately. Do you remember back in the, I would say, 1980s, somewhere in that time frame, I forget exactly, was the original TV series of Miami Vice. It was produced by Michael Mann. It was a very, very popular show.
Sure.
And I remember in the, I think it was the second or third season, between when it was just getting the drug dealers on the streets and Crockett himself going wacko, there was this wonderful episode where they had basically traced the flow of drug money to this big bank. And there was this really sleazy-looking bank executive. In fact, I think it was the same actor who played the preacher in the Poltergeist franchise. And he was out there basically saying, no, you're not going to go any further than this. Because we have made loans to these countries that are sending drugs into our country, and if that flow of drugs stops, then our bank will default. And so you can rest assured that we will make a phone call where your investigation will go no further than it has. And it was the first time that the American public was given an indicator of that very tight relationship between banking industries and the drug trade. Then, of course, we had the BCCI scandal after that, and now, of course, the HSBC scandal after that. So it really is all tied up, and it does represent an immense power block of wealth and influence, and I'd like to see them chip away at it. And maybe it's time for them to start thinking about a limited hangout to cut their losses and just cut the Clintons loose and protect the drug cartel over at the CIA and just let the Clintons go off and go to jail as they richly deserve. But this CIA drug running has corrupted our entire government far, far worse than the alcohol corruption during Prohibition. We're seeing that same cycle of corruption all over again. And we may have to end it the same way they ended the Prohibition corruption, by ending Prohibition and simply saying, okay, the drugs aren't illegal anymore, and that destroys the profit in them. The reason drugs are being kept illegal in this country is to keep the profit high. In other countries where they have decriminalized these drugs, a lot of the associated problems with the drug trade have gone away. No gangland shootings. You don't have drug dealers going down to the schoolyard to tempt little kids with free samples because there's no profit to be made in it. And it really does work to decriminalize, but the whole point of criminalizing an illicit substance is to maximize the profitability for those who are trafficking in illicit substances, whether it's the rum runners or the bootleggers or the cocaine smugglers today.
Mike, just to close the circle here, I know that you've covered before, and I can't remember the details, but of Loretta Lynch and before him, Eric Holder, and their links to the banks, or what they did not prosecute with the banks.
Yes.
And then, of course, we have the banks being huge donors to Hillary and Obama, and I'm sure Trump too, frankly. But I mean, the banks seem to want to ensure that the Justice Department, the Attorney General, the FBI, are always staffed with their own guys.
Well, that's how they keep themselves above the law. And I think what you're referring to, when HSBC was caught laundering drug money, they faced very stiff penalties and punishments in other countries. But in the United States, they got a wrist slap.
Price of doing business, you know.
Yes.
You know, you make $100 billion and pay $1 million, or $10 million in fines.
That's basically it. Yes.
You've got to do that, though, Mike. If it's ever really going to be redressed, that has to be taken care of.
I absolutely agree here. And like I said, while I don't think we need longer prison sentences for drug users, they really need treatment. I'm in agreement with Attorney General Sessions that for the dealers, we got to start taking them off the street and locking them away, because that's the base of the pyramid from which all this money flows into these various drug lords to buy that opium coming in from Afghanistan and the cocaine coming in from South America.
Maybe, Mike, maybe that's why Kennedy was so disliked by the powers that be, is that the Justice Department under him was under his brother and reporting to him and not the banks for once.
Yeah, well, Kennedy did more than that. Kennedy signed that Executive Order 11110 to introduce a new debt-free currency into the public, the United States note. And he put about $4.5 billion of United States notes into circulation to support commerce, and it wasn't generating interest for the Federal Reserve. And that was absolutely something the Federal Reserve did not want to have happen. And if you remember, following Kennedy's assassination, one of the Warren Commission members was John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank. Right. And I don't care how good a banker he is, he's not qualified to be investigating a murder case, so we may assume safely that he was there to make sure that the link between the assassination and the Executive Order 11110 remained concealed from the American public.
Yeah, I agree with you, man.
Okay?
Well, all right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now then, the other day we were talking about this new CNN video of the chemical incident at Idlib, and already it's being torn apart. And over at Washington's blog, they have an article saying that it's edited for maximum shock value, and it's edited to take out all the goofs that were spotted in the earlier version. but there's nothing new in it. It's the same material in a new package to the soundtrack of look what Assad did, except that there's nothing in there that supports the claim Assad did it. And again, the claim itself makes no sense. Assad is on the verge of winning back his country. There were peace talks that were starting that were going to keep him in power. Even the White House had said, we accept the political reality, Assad will remain in power in Syria. So why would Assad do the one thing that would absolutely destroy the path that he was on? And the answer is he wouldn't. Of course he wouldn't. It didn't make any sense. There was no upside for Assad to do something, and every reason for the U.S.-backed rebels to carry out another chemical attack to frame on Assad, which they've been caught doing at least twice before. And I'm very, very concerned with all this military buildup around Syria. There's going to be another very slickly produced false flag. And by the way, I misspoke the other day. It's not Press TV. It's Al Jazeera that got hired to film this new horrific war crime chemical weapon attack. And it's a big production, 30, 40 emergency vehicles, along with that other bizarre story that a nearby hospital was broken into. The morgue was broken into, and the bodies of 20 dead children were stolen. Now, what are you going to use that for unless it's for set decoration? So they're getting ready to uncork a really whopper of a false flag on us to try and get us all hot and bothered to go back into Syria. But we've been down this road so many times. Fool me once, shame on me. Oh, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about Syria. And we're talking about the fact that in the short space of just a few weeks, we have gone from Syria almost being over to ramping up the war again. And apparently, U.S. military personnel have entered southern Syria at the Tanf border crossing. So we now have American boots on the ground in Syria. They are supposedly trainers, training units of the Free Syria Army. Now, the Free Syria Army is a bit of a misnomer. They're hired mercenaries. 90% of them are not from Syria. They're one of the U.S.-backed groups trying to topple Assad. So we're already back to this on the ground, toppling Assad. And if you're my age, you'll remember this idea of trainers and advisors. That's how we got into Vietnam. Yes, we're sending over advisors. They're not really combat troops. And yes, they're wearing helmets and bulletproof things, and they're carrying guns. But really, they're just advisors. And look how that all ended up. Now, looking at a map of the Tanf border crossing, it's actually almost ideally situated to literally drive north and carve off that little bit of Syria that they want for the future Kurdistan. So that may be one of the things they're thinking about there from that specific location. Syria's government is now claiming that 5,000 ethnic Uyghurs from China's violence-prone far western region of Xinjiang are fighting in the various militant groups in Syria against the Syrian government. And Syria's ambassador to China said Beijing should be extremely concerned about it. And China's worried that the Uyghurs, mostly Muslim people who speak a Turkish language, have gone to Syria and Iraq to fight for militants there, having traveled illegally via Southeast Asia and Turkey. Now, as you know, Donald Trump has signed an executive order arming the Kurds with very sophisticated weapons. Now, we've seen photos where these Kurdish fighters have U.S. weapons, so they've been getting them all along, but now it's official. And, of course, it's going to escalate the situation, not just with Syria, but Turkey. Turkey is very unhappy that the Kurds are getting these weapons. Turkey is talking about breaking off relations with the United States. So that whole region is descending into complete chaos. And I think Trump is getting some bad advice in terms of military planning, or, as we have seen many indications already, the Pentagon has just gone rogue, and they have decided they will decide what our military foreign policy is going to be. And because it is the Pentagon and they love their weapons, it's basically like the law of the hammer. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the law of the hammer says if you give a 5-year-old child a hammer, everything they encounter needs pounding. Same thing applies to the Pentagon. If you give the Pentagon a bomb, everything they encounter needs bombing. That's going to be the mindset here. Now, over in Yemen, little bit of a victory, probably temporary, but it's still going to be sparking everybody up. Apparently, yesterday, the Yemeni army and popular committees took control of a Saudi military outpost in Asir province. In other words, they went into Saudi Arabia and took control of this outpost. So maybe Saudi Arabia will start to feel what it feels like to have your country invaded. We'll be right back after station identification. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here, hour number 2, and an alert reader, listener, just wrote on in and identified the Miami Vice episode that I was referring to. It was called Prodigal Son. It was a 2-parter, and the scene I'm talking about was in part 2. This was in 1985, the middle of the 2nd season. And he sent me a link where you can watch the whole episode, and I'm going to put it over in Reader's Letters, which will be updated at the end of the show, so you can go in and look at it. I remember there used to be an excerpt of just that scene on YouTube, but I'm unable to find it right now. Getting on back to the news here, Defense Secretary Mattis today has issued a statement condemning Russia for its military deployments within Russian territory, saying such moves are destabilizing, even though the moves are part of a planned and announced upcoming war games. But it's destabilizing here. Now, come on. Who is putting their weapons along whose borders? Have you seen any Russian warships cruising the Gulf of Mexico or within eyesight of the California coast? Is Russia sending tanks and artillery into Canada on their side of the border with the United States? Ditto into Mexico on their side of the border with the United States? It is not Russia who is destabilizing the world. And for Mattis to come on out there and basically say Russia shouldn't move military assets around inside their own territory, when the U.S. is sending military assets all over the globe, does he really think people are going to buy into this nonsense? I don't think so. Or if he does, then the man is delusional here. Very clever little bit of propaganda being done over in Ukraine. Apparently, the eastern Ukrainian republics have managed to work out a system where they can mass send text messages to the cell phones being carried by the Ukraine soldiers. And they're sending out messages like they'll find your bodies when the snow melts. If you're under fire at the time, it could be a little bit unnerving, but it's a very clever thing to do. It's sort of the cyber equivalent of dropping pamphlets on the enemy. Now, getting on over to the other side of the world here, China is amassing new anti-warship missiles as we seem to be irrevocably on the road to World War III. And the situation between China and the U.S. and North Korea is starting to get very, very murky, because the U.S. was counting on China to help rein in North Korea, and China is doing that, but at the same time, the U.S. is still pushing on China regarding the South China Sea, even though there are multiple treaties that say those islands belong to China. And those treaties go back to the end of World War II. The problem we have here is a government that has no respect for any treaties, including the ones they themselves have signed. Now, we are getting word that Russia's new S-500 missile system is undergoing final testing before deployment. And this sounds like a really amazing thing if it lives up to the hype. Apparently, it can engage targets in the upper layer of the atmosphere, 62 miles above Earth's surface. I saw another report which said it could, in theory, hit a low Earth orbiting satellite. And it has a range of more than 370 miles, and it fires far more rapidly and tracks many more targets than the older S-400. I really don't think we should be getting into a war with those folks. Now, over in Israel, as you know, lately there have been a whole slew of new questionable killings of Palestinians, where the Israeli police or the IDF will say, well, they were attacking us with a knife, they were doing this, and the witnesses will say, no, they weren't even close together. The Israelis just hauled off and shot them. And very alarming article out of Desert Peace apparently the Israeli police have this new ride-along program for 5th graders that train them in the correct way to take down an assailant armed with a knife and then verify the assailant is dead. These are 5th graders they're talking about. That's a little out there. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike.
Aloha.
Hey, listen, I don't know. I understand Roger Stone was on Alex Jones on InfoWars. He claims that McMaster way out. This guy seems to be this idiot wanted to put 150,000 more American troops into Syria. Supposedly Trump stopped it. That's what Roger Stone says. First of all, there's a couple of things. I don't know why Russia is even allowing this. They should put their red line in there and say no, you're not coming in. No. Like this. The other thing is,
hang on before you go any further. Putin is trying not to escalate the situation. It's all being escalated from the side of the United States. And, I was hearing that a lot of the White House insiders, the ones who are not part of the neocon machine, are actively trying to find ways to get some of these people out, like McMaster's, and he's the new target. And remember, the only reason McMaster's is in there is because they were able to get Michael Flynn out, and now it turns out Flynn was completely innocent of any wrongdoing, and I would like to see McMaster's fired, and Trump asked for Flynn to come back on in. But if Trump did put a stop to McMaster's plan to start escalating the war, then it's another indicator that we may finally be actually seeing the Donald Trump we voted into that office.
Yeah, well, Flynn understood from the get-go about what was going on in Syria, and he warned about it. He had warned. That's one of the reasons he fell out with Obama, because he told Obama to stop arming these terrorists, and Obama just went about doing what he wanted. Now, I got this message for American troops. Okay, first of all, having been in the military myself, I would not join the military today. Anybody who's thinking about joining the military, really think about it many different times. All right, because you're not going to be defending this country when doing stuff like this. Not defending, going into places like Syria like that, and arming terrorists, rather than defending the country, you're hurting the country, you're endangering the country, and you're endangering other countries. The other thing is, people in the military, I'm hoping that they start to get in this. It almost happened in 2012 with when they were talking about bombing Syria after that phony gas attack at that time, and you had troops all over the place posting on Facebook and Twitter saying, we're not going to be the Syrian Air Force.
Yes.
We're not going to be the Air Force for Al-Qaeda. That time they didn't even know about ISIS. We hadn't invented ISIS yet, or the Israelis hadn't, or the Saudis, whoever invented ISIS. And and that's one of the reasons they stopped, because they were worried about a full-fledged mutiny. And also, during the Vietnam War, what ended the Vietnam War finally, is not what people tell you. It was troops mutinying all over the place. And not only that, a lot of what you call fragging at the time, shooting their officers, topping and NCOs that kept getting them into firefights or being too gung-ho. A lot of them just didn't want to go on the field anymore. So, this is what's going to happen. This is what they're going to cost. Because we're not really a militaristic nation. People in this country don't want war. We're sick and tired of these people, these warmongers. As far as I'm concerned, they can all go to hell. They're not defending this country. They're hurting this country's interests. That's all they're doing. We don't need to keep funding this monster either. We should actually cut the military budget, I think, by half, instead of giving it more. And we still have, Russia only has $48 billion they fund their military with. And from what I can see, they'd probably kick our ass in the localized war. Nuclear war, nobody would win. But I just don't understand it. Cut that damn military budget once and for all, and let's stop this nonsense. Let's withdraw our troops from all over the world. Don't belong in these places. What was that sailor got killed the other day in Somalia? For what? What did he die for? He died for nothing. He wasn't defending this country. I'm sorry. I know people don't want to hear that. How was he defending the United States of America by being over there in Somalia, helping one terrorist army fight another terrorist army in a country that's in turmoil? Can you tell me that? How he was defending the United States?
Well, he wasn't. He's defending U.S. business interests. And more and more, when we talk about, why are we attacking these other countries on the other side of the world? They haven't attacked us. And you'll say, well, they're a threat to our interests. But the interests are not our. The interests are those of Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, and money junkies in general. And they're trying to convince you that it's perfectly acceptable, even patriotic indeed, to allow your children to be killed and crippled in order to make rich people richer than they already are.
You know, Mike, it really hurts me to have to say stuff like this. It really does, because I love this country, and I love, I still love the military. I mean, the military does, as a whole, defend this country if it was in this country defending this country. But it's not defending the country going around the world. If anything, it's making things a lot less safe, because you're creating terrorists even when where you don't have terrorists by doing this. You're creating this thing you're creating a situation for the refugees in Europe and the United States.
Yes, you are.
That's all they're doing. They're not making this country safe. They're actually hurting this country. They're not protecting this country. And I'll be honest with you. After 9/11, as soon as my kids got old enough to join the military, a few years later, well, one of my sons joined. I didn't discourage him because at the time I believed. He's out now. Now he's a lot smarter. He joined the Air Force at the time, believing that he was going to, help avenge what happened in 9/11. And believe it or not, at that time, I believed it too. I thought 9/11 was legit. I thought we were really attacked by a bunch of Muslim terrorists. Now I realize, no, that wasn't it at all. I don't know who attacked us, but it wasn't these so-called Muslims. They may have been pawns. They may have been used for a degree, but it wasn't them. I would have never encouraged him to join the military. As a matter of fact, when the recruiter went to his high school, I'd have told that recruiter to get lost. We had some words.
Well, unfortunately, schools are required by law to allow the recruiters on the campus. They can't refuse, or they lose their federal funding. And again, we don't even know who was actually doing 9/11. We know that some of the accused Muslim perpetrators turned out to still be alive after 9/11. On one of the planes, on the entire plane, when they were using DNA to identify the bodies for burial, they didn't detect any Muslim DNA at all. And so this idea that Muslims had something to do with 9/11 was bogus right from the beginning. But again, go back and look at the history.
I suspect there were Muslims involved.
Go back and look.
There were the Saudis.
Go back
together with the Israelis and with our government.
Okay, let me finish this thought here. Go back and look at the history of how the United States government gets you to go to war. It's a lie, a fraud, a hoax. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. The Lusitania wasn't smuggling weapons to Britain in violation of neutrality. Pearl Harbor was a complete surprise. Saddam Hussein has nuclear weapons. Assad has sarin gas. Blah 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 blah.
The one thing I disagree with you about is Pearl Harbor. The only reason with that is we risked our whole Pacific fleet. I don't think they understood the importance of aircraft carriers yet at that time.
Well, you need to remember when the Japanese arrived here at Pearl Harbor, all the modern ships were out and away off to the southwest, out of range of the Japanese strike force. Everything that was still in the harbor was junk, holdovers from World War I. The USS Iowa, which was the Arizona sister ship, had already been taken off combat status. It was being used for gunnery training. And basically they set up these old junker ships to be the targets for the Japanese attack. And all of the modern carriers and their modern auxiliaries were sent way out to sea to keep them safe.
Yeah, but the carriers, they didn't realize how important the carriers would be at the time. The only countries that had carriers at the time were the United States, Britain, and I believe the Soviet Union might have had them. I'm not sure. I don't even think the Germans had aircraft carriers at the time.
But the Japanese did. The Japanese did. The Japanese saw the value. Anyway, listen, I got to let you go. I've given you a lot of time here. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're going to go to Fred in Iowa. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, you got me, Mike.
Okay.
Yeah. That previous caller, he just summed it all up clearly. And I will be modest. We got this jerk in the morning, warmongering and going on and glorifying, jump and die, and then send your sons over there. That is insane. Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay. Well, yeah, I remember Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler was a good soldier, very popular, rose through the ranks, and after he retired, and he had the freedom to tell the truth, he wrote this little article called War is a Racket. You can hunt it down online, where he basically said nothing he did in his career was about protecting America from enemies. It was about going into other countries and overthrowing governments who were not friendly to American oil interests or American banks. And that was what his entire career was all about. The reality is that the United States is safe from actual attack because of our nuclear deterrent. My parents' generation was forced to fork over $5 trillion, and that's back when $1 trillion was really a lot of money, for the SSBNs, the Minuteman missiles, the bombers, all of that, on the promise that this would prevent this nation from ever coming under attack by another country. Well, if we've got that, then we don't need any of the other branches of military, do we? Because we are safe from attack. Somebody attacks us, we nuke them. And the United States is, in fact, the only country in the history of the world to use nuclear weapons on another country. So it's a credible threat. All of the rest of the military, the foreign bases, the carrier groups, and all the rest of it are about going into other people's countries and taking things away from them. That's what it's about. All right, one more phone call. Fran in Washington, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha nui nui, Michael.
Aloha nui nui.
Hey, one more thing about 9/11. The architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and I'm not sure if it's a com or org, but it's AE 9/11 Truth.
It's an org.
Search on that.
It's an org.
It's an org?
Yep.
I kind of thought so. They found thermite residue in the dust of 9/11.
Oh, yeah.
And thermite is what the demolition people use to bring down a building.
Well, it's one of the things that they can use, but it's most assuredly something that shouldn't have been in the ruins of the building if they were brought down by an impact by a passenger jet. And you need to remember that the Twin Towers were designed to survive an impact by a passenger jet, an even heavier passenger jet, because there had been a prior incident where an aircraft had actually crashed into the Empire State Building. So the idea that those towers were going to come down from these aircraft impact, that was already pushing it a little bit. But yes, they found evidence of thermite. We have photos showing the load-bearing members in the towers with clear signs of demolition cutter charges on them.
I have a copy of that photo of the firefighter at Ground Zero with the rectangular beams cut on about a 45-degree angle behind him.
Yeah.
With molten metal dripping down from the perfectly straight cuts.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, and have a happy Pauhana Friday and weekend, and I'll talk to you later.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. Now, the other day we reported on this report that had come on out saying that since the end of World War II, since World War II was over, the U.S. government has killed 20 million people in 37 other countries. And it turns out that report was only giving the low end of the estimate, because now we're finding that the report actually said it may be as high as 30 million people in 37 different countries killed by U.S. military interventions. That's a lot of people. In fact, that's World War scale right there in and of itself. If you look at how many people died in World War II, it was a lower number. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to talk about the media and culture here just a little tiny bit. There's an interesting article over at townhall.com, and it talks about the unraveling of civil society from Johnny Carson to Stephen Colbert. And they're basically saying you need to actually do a comparison between the two shows. Johnny Carson was a show that anybody could watch, including children. They didn't get nasty. They didn't use obscenities. It was playing to an entire family in an age where adults felt they had to set a good example for the next generation. And we seem to have gotten away from that. And it's indicated, again, comparing Carson to Colbert or a lot of what's on the media right now. And so it's hardly any surprise the nonpartisan research group PRRI did a study which found that the majority of Americans believe the United States is losing its culture and identity. And the media is partly to blame. The influx of refugees and immigrants, these overt actions by the government to erase icons of our history and culture, like all the Confederate monuments. Our society is being torn down from within. Apparently, YouTube is continuing to demonetize almost all political speech. There's a war going on between the corporate media, the controlled media, and the independent media, and it's getting ugly out there. It really, really is. All right, let's turn to the economic news here because it's not particularly pleasant, but we're going to get into it. Moody's has now slashed the ratings on 6 Canadian banks out of fears of asset quality deterioration and soaring household debt. Now, household debt is a problem all over, and it's an artifact of private central banking. The phrase asset quality deterioration is banker speak for assets were overpriced in order to use as collateral. And that may be why Moody's did this. Of course, looking at how forgiving Moody's was of the mortgage-backed securities fraud in 2008, it may be that we're starting to see more indications of an economic war between the United States and Canada. And that is a very, very troubling thing indeed. Where we are right now, basically the condo market, housing market is collapsing. The world's largest oil trade says there's no growth. There's no growth whatsoever. Credit is breaking down. Retail is a disaster. J.P. Morgan Chase is telling smaller banks to combine deposits because there's going to be a problem later this year. Even J.P. Morgan is saying there's a big whoopsie on the horizon. Now, apparently Coinbase, which is one of these virtual currency brokers, is all of a sudden unable to fill orders. And it's raising the possibilities. Failure to execute. Did somebody guess in the wrong direction? Was it a scam? Which is always have to keep an eye out for. We live in an age of scammers. Scammers are the only ones making any money. Anybody trying to earn an honest living is in serious, serious trouble. British Telecom is getting ready to axe 4,000 jobs across the globe. And a lot of this has to do with profits that plunged 19% over last year. And apparently some of that is still an after effect of a situation where British Telecom was caught throttling bandwidth, not giving their customers the bandwidth the customers thought that they were paying for, which is getting to be pretty much a problem everywhere. We're still dealing with the after effects of Spectrum. If you go to Down Detector, the problems are growing. Whatever's going on at Spectrum, it is getting worse. They're not able to get a handle on it. And I did another speed check on my internet feed. I'm getting only 10% of the bandwidth I pay for. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economy. Snapchat has had a bit of a problem. Their first earning report, they lost $2.2 billion with a B. But the real news is over at Macy's. They've reported a $45 million loss, and they're screaming that foot traffic continues to dwindle. They're still trying to lay it off on online sales, but online sales really only account for 2% of economic activity in the retail sector. And apparently Macy's is probably going to close another 100 stores. But what's going on here is kind of simple, and it's twofold. First of all, and I don't know why our nation's economic planners do not understand this, there is no more money out here. Everybody out here is living hand to mouth. We're just barely able to pay the rent, just barely able to put food on the table. We don't have money left over to go on into Macy's and buy a bunch of stuff. The era of conspicuous overconsumption is gone. The second problem is that as Macy's has tried to maximize profitability to keep their stockholders happy, the quality of goods being sold in the Macy's stores, at least the one that we go to, has been noticeably in decline. Some of it just looks like punched metal junk. No finishing. About 2-3 years ago, I think I talked about where I had quit trying to have these modern computerized coffee makers because the little gold baskets kept failing and you could never get a replacement. And so I went back to a standard coffee press. And the first one I got, I bought at Macy's. And after only a couple of weeks, the little plastic lacquering around it began to peel away. And I didn't want that floating in my coffee. So that's what I'm talking about. And I went back to Macy's and I said, these things are defective. When you put hot water in them, this little plastic covering over the metal is going to start peeling away. And they said, oh, okay, fine. Next time I went back, they were on the clearance table. They were still selling them, knowing there was a problem. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Lenny in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Doing okay.
Okay, listen. Excuse me. Two things I want to say. Pertaining to 9/11 and the people who are asked or who are saying to themselves, I have no idea who committed 9/11. Well, here's my rule of thumb for determining things and such. Think like a good detective would think. Okay? The first thing they ask themselves is who stands to benefit?
Yes.
Then take a good look at who's benefited. And that should give you the answer who was behind it. Okay?
Yes.
One. And two, when you spoke about the demoralization, okay, I know that true art really having a moral standard elevates the soul. It's almost as if it's a planned thing to demoralize humanity. Okay, devalue, it just take us down to the depths of hell when it comes to morality. When you were speaking about Johnny Carson and Stephen Colbert, you don't even have to go that far back to Johnny Carson, and you were right. I was a kid. My mom let me step and watch Johnny Carson because she thought he was funny and he was clean. Well, Jay Leno was the same thing. And if you notice, none of the people ever beat him, be it Jimmy Kimmel, be it Bill Maher, be it David Letterman, be it anybody they tried to put in his place. They never beat him in the ratings, but they got him out anyway. Okay? Because I think it's because he stood for a standard.
Yes. Well, I remember there was a lot of politics around Jay Leno, and there was a lot of bad blood left over from the fight for the Tonight Show between him and Letterman.
Yeah, but hey, if I think Jay Leno proved his worth. Letterman didn't beat him, did he?
Well,
over 20-something years they beat him.
Well, Letterman had. I think if I recall correctly, and this is a long time ago, I think Letterman had good ratings initially, and then Leno took over and maintained the lead after that. But yeah, after a while, we started to see the face of television change, and anybody who wasn't going to go along with the political agenda was basically eased out.
And I still watch what they call antenna TV. I don't know if they have it over there in Hawaii, but you can watch a good Andy Griffith episode. And I remember the one Andy Griffith episode when Opie got his first slingshot, and he killed the bird. And he was happy and proud to come home and show his pa Andy that he had killed the bird. But then Andy said, I want you to listen to this. And they stood on the porch, and you could hear the baby birds crying in the distance. Okay, and Andy explained to him that because of what he did, those little birds wouldn't survive because he had killed their mother.
Yes.
And then Opie, the rest of the episode was about him raising the birds and setting them free at the end. What a moral story. Okay, and this is what I'm saying. It's almost as if we've gone down to total dystopia now. They don't want anything of morality. Okay, which tells me that there's a bigger game at play here.
I agree with you. I absolutely do agree with you. The United States, as it is today, is certainly, in terms of its culture and morality, it's not the country that I was born into. And it does seem like our corporate media is encouraging this decline of our culture. And we're seeing all this violence in the streets. We're seeing the fanning up of racial tension. We're seeing the liberal crybabies out there with this idea that all they have to do is threaten violence and scream and cry, and they can get whatever they want, like a free pass on their final exams or a blacks-only area on campus, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later in the show. Anyway, listen, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and I'm going to get on back here to the news. We're still talking about the economic news. Perhaps on the basis of Macy's earnings report, Wall Street took a little bit of a tumble today, basically on that the retail numbers. They're not good. People are not buying things, and it's not the fault of the online retailers. It's because we have no money left. And I don't understand why people are not getting that. Most Americans, that includes Claire and I, we're just hanging on. We don't have the money to go on out and buy stuff. In fact, right now, half of my wardrobe is T-shirts that were sent in as gifts by the fans, okay? But, I mean, that's where it is. People have to have money to go to the shopping malls. And, again, going all the way back to 2008, when the mortgage-backed security fraud collapsed, everything the U.S. government did was absolutely the wrong thing for the economy as a whole. It was great for the Wall Street bankers and for those members of Congress whose stock portfolios have shares in those Wall Street bankers, but it was terrible for the economy as a whole. When that whole mortgage-backed security fraud fell apart, if the U.S. government, instead of taking trillions away from the American people to give to the bankers so the bankers could loan it back to the American people at interest, if they had gone to the Wall Street banks and said, you made this mess, we're going to take the money away from you and we're going to give it back to the American people, then nobody would have missed a mortgage payment. There wouldn't have been a mortgage crisis. People would have had money to go down to the shopping malls and buy products, hopefully made in America. They would have been able to buy new cars. There wouldn't have been an automotive bailout. People would have made their credit card payments. There wouldn't have been a credit problem. But everything that has happened since 2008 was because of this policy of plundering the American people to keep Wall Street happy. And you can only go back to that well so many times. And the well is dry. Our current economic system is designed to take wealth out of the pockets of the people and drive it up to the top and keep it there. And it doesn't do the economy as a whole to have a big stinking pile of money over just a very few families. For an economy to perpetuate and be healthy, there must be a recycling mechanism by which that money accumulated at the top comes back down to the bottom so that ordinary working and middle-class people can trade their labor for decent wages and salaries so that they can take that money and pump it back into the economy at the bottom. Prior to 2008, 60% of the U.S. economic activity was consumerism. That's how important it was to make sure Americans had money to go on buying things at the shopping malls. And I guess our award-winning economists can't see that. Apparently, Winn-Dixie's parent is going to close 20 of their stores, considering layoffs as the grocery industry is the next sector to get crushed. I'm not sure about that. People do have to eat. and in so many parts of the country, it is now illegal to try and produce your own food on your own ground, on your own land. In parts of the California's Bay Area, $105,000 a year is now considered low income. The cost of living goes up. The average wages and salary continue to drop. Obviously, there's a crossover point where the system is going to break down, and we are getting there. Apparently, in the Bay Area, there's actually a treehouse, and it is a nice treehouse. Okay. Apparently, it was built back in 1913, and it's been upgraded and improved. You've probably seen this reality show about this guy who goes around and builds these really nice tree houses. One of those. It's on the market for $679,000. This is a tree house. Right now, story from Dr. Housing Bubble, nearly 40% of 18 to 34-year-old Americans are still living with their parents in California. Most of them are working, but they can't earn enough to rent their own home, let alone buy a home. That's how bad the economy really is. The American dream is all but gone. Available in other countries, not here. And with all of these young millennials, 18 to 34, still living with their parents, not renting, not buying homes, why are rents and home prices still going up? I think the speculators are at it again. We're seeing the same froth up in real estate prices that preceded the 2008 collapse. The money junkies love bubbles. They blow a bubble, they ride it up to the top, they get off just before it bursts, they make money, everybody else loses. And they're not going to stop doing it because every time they cause one of these meltdowns, they are not the ones forced to pay for it all, you are. That's what TARP and QE and bailout and all of this is. It all comes down to taking money away from the American people and giving it to the banks so the banks can loan it back to the people at interest. It's a great deal for the banks, terrible for the American people. Now, Aetna Incorporated is now quitting the Obamacare markets. And they've gotten on out saying that they've lost $200 million on this deal. The health insurance companies thought they were going to get rich off of Obamacare, but those Obamacare-compliant health insurance policies are hideously expensive with sky-high deductibles. Most people will never actually use that policy unless they have a serious illness or injury. Their normal annual medical care doesn't meet the deductible. So they're getting no benefit from it. So, of course, if you have a product that costs a lot and is of no benefit, what do? You get the government to order people to buy it. But a lot of people simply chose not to buy it and accept the IRS penalty instead. Obamacare is a disaster. The liberal Democrats are still out there. We want our Obamacare. And it has nothing to do with whether or not it works. It's all about turf. This is our accomplishment. This is President Obama's signature achievement. Now, Marine Le Pen has now gone public, saying what we have been hearing for the last few days, the French election was rigged. They have been looking into this issue of the torn ballots. And the way this all worked is there were stacks of ballots for Marine Le Pen and for Macron. And the idea is you'd take a ballot and you would, with one of their names, and you'd stick it in the counting box. That was it. Very simple, very transparent. Unfortunately, the Le Pen ballots were being stolen from the public polling places. There was even some guy shot a video of himself stealing all the Le Pen ballots. Now, a lot of vote by mail, something went really weird because 1/3 of all the ballots sent out to voters were torn at the time of mailing. They arrived at the citizens' homes already torn. And under French law, a torn ballot cannot be counted. And so this is 60% of the available Le Pen ballots were spoiled. They even announced on the day of the election there was a huge problem with spoiled votes, but they were all Le Pen votes. There was not one single report of a Macron ballot arriving in the mail torn. They're stealing elections. They don't even care if you notice it or not. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. More than 50% of Brits are convinced that the European Union is trying to derail Brexit in the coming June elections. New poll from YouGov. It basically says the British people suspect the European Union is trying to influence the outcome of the general election to get the Brexiteers out and the Remainers in order to set the stage for a new Brexit vote that will keep Great Britain enslaved to the European Central Bank and to Brussels. Now, we keep hearing that other member states of the European Union are thinking about leaving, are in serious trouble, and the new one here is Austria. Apparently, their government is on the verge of collapse due to a shock resignation. And there's going to be a new election, but it could bring a sovereignty Eurosceptic ruler into power. And it was triggered after Vice Chancellor Reinhold Mitterlehner resigned, triggered calls for a new election. And in a new election, the far-right Freedom Party, which is Eurosceptic, is probably going to win, unless they go on in and start tearing up the ballots and stealing the ballots there as well, which obviously we're seeing that's a pattern here. Okay, story coming out of shtfplan.com. The map the media doesn't want you to see. Nations with the most refugees have the most terror attacks. Admit it, you're not surprised. And we're seeing the globalists, instead of dealing with the fact that this open border are bringing in terroristic individuals, trying to get us to say, well, terrorism is just a normal part of life now. You shouldn't get upset. It's just an accepted part of the background, and we don't understand why you're making such a fuss. Yeah, we're going to make a fuss. All right, we've got to take another break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we take some phone calls, interesting little story coming out of Great Britain. Apparently there's an epidemic of knife attacks that have claimed 11 victims in 2 weeks. This is apparently a 17-year-old was stabbed to death in northwest London over the weekend. Gee, I thought when they banned the guns, that meant everybody would be safe and there'd be no more death in the streets. Wow, that's weird. I mean, you know, Britain, they've been disarmed and still people are dying, which tells you it was never the guns. It's the violent individual, and they're going to commit violence with whatever's at hand. A knife, a beer bottle. Great Britain actually mounted a project to develop a shatterproof beer mug because of all the facial lacerations that were occurring in pubs arising out of fights here. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Brendan in San Francisco, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Just wanted to comment on the living situation.
Hello?
He dropped off. Sorry.
Okay, let's go to Jerry in Chicago. Jerry, aloha. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Thanks a lot for taking my call. I just wanted to call in about your show Monday, third hour. You had a caller call in about Nikolai Tesla, yes. Edward Leedscallion, and he left off a name. Edgar Casey, the sleeping prophet.
That I don't think was really relevant to the discussion that we were having, which was mostly about electricity and radio. Okay?
Okay. Well, yeah, but one other thing, too, is he made a claim that they all lived around the same time. They all died within about 4 years of each other, as I can remember. But, I mean, they were three outstanding people.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily connected or significant, and in any event, discussions about Edgar Casey, that's something that would be more appropriate over at Jeff Rentz. So thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Get on back to the news here. This one actually made the corporate media. I just saw it on Fox News here. Apparently there was this illegal immigrant who has been deported 15 times. Constantino Banda Acosta. He's a 38-year-old Mexican citizen. He's been deported 15 times. The last time was only last January. He comes right across the border. Apparently got in a car, was driving drunk, ran a stop sign in San Ysidro, and has given a 6-year-old boy a fractured skull. So, again, every nation on earth has a right to decide who does and does not come into that country, to make sure that person is going to be a benefit to their society. That's just common sense. And these open border, New World Order, global government people, they're so in love with their dream of a borderless world, they don't care how ordinary people pay the price for it. Look over in Europe, where they're starting to say, well, rapes by the Muslim refugees aren't really rape because they don't know any better. They should learn. They're in a European country that has rape laws. We've got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Oh, we have Brendan in San Francisco's back. Aloha, what's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I was just going to comment on the living situation here in the Bay Area. I've discovered that a lot of the properties in San Francisco are being bought up by Chinese investors to protect their money from whatever's happening in their homeland. A lot of these units are sitting empty just for investment purposes. Also, they do get green cards with the purchase of their properties. Other thing, people are supplementing their living by Airbnb-ing out their units, and that's creating a shortage of housing here as well and driving up the rents. And I've actually seen where students that are here are doing escort service to kind of supplement their income. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, we've got people living in their cars by Golden Gate Park. So it's kind of a mess over here, people just trying to stay above water. But there's a guy that's been bragging on the internet how he's got some people subletting his unit while he's living in Tahiti 3 months out of the year, and finally they cracked down on that. But, you know, there's a bunch of units sitting here empty while we've got people living on the streets. It's a mess.
Yeah, it is, and we're seeing it all across the country. The new image of America are a bunch of homeless people camped out in front of boarded-up homes, and it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. I mean, in '89 we had the earthquake here, and it scared the jeepers out of a lot of people, and they actually left the city and went back to wherever they're from, and it was kind of nice because the city kind of went back to normal, and I'm expecting another reset if we have a big quake here, which we're well overdue. A lot of these buildings are just piled on top of each other, and they're like matchsticks waiting to go up in flames again. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Well, I wouldn't want to wish that on anybody, but it's obviously, if you live in California, there's a risk of quakes, and apparently scientists are getting very nervous about that Cascadia fault letting go, because that one is way, way overdue. But again, the way the rules are set up to allow Chinese investors to buy up the properties and just sit on them, again, it's good for business. It's not good for the people. And I think people everywhere are just reaching the breaking point of so much abuse that we are suffering at the hands of this corporatocracy, if you will.
Yeah, a side note on the Chinese investors, I understand that there's actually more Chinese illegal immigration into California than from Mexico, which is kind of an interesting side note that no one really thinks about.
Well, I was unaware of that figure. I'm kind of wondering how the Chinese managed to sneak in. I mean, it's not like they can walk across the border. Or maybe they do. They sail into Mexico and come north. I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah, I actually was hanging out at the Golden Gate Bridge one night with some friends drinking beer when I was a teenager, and literally, I'm not making this up, we're sitting there just relaxing, and all of a sudden, coming up from the beach, bunches of Asian folks scrambling up the hillside, and they must have been dropped off on a small dinghy off from the coast, and we've got all the shipping containers that come in through the Golden Gate from China. So I know there's a smuggling route there. It's just another, illegal or black market. I think we talked about that before, where it's like drugs, guns, people. There's all kinds of smuggling going on, and people are just cargo. And it's horrific, the conditions that those folks come over in these containers and in their own feces and things. It's just really horrible what's going on.
It really is, and it is a shame, but it's a real mess out there. I don't, man. Maybe one of the reasons they're moving to a new world war is to deliberately thin out the human population, because the 30 million that the U.S. government has killed since the end of World War II is just a small dent in the problem, and that's certainly something a world war can do, especially with these biological weapons, is thin out the population.
Yeah, we're witnessing. I mean, I'm not a big religious guy, but we're witnessing like biblical kind of end times events. We're living in it, so I guess it's hard to recognize the forest for the trees or whatnot. I mean, we are literally in the middle of this thing, and it's kicked off. Like you keep saying, we are in World War III. We're just waiting for that big bang, and you know, it's funny that we're so awake. A lot of us are awake that they're probably scared to fail at another false flag, or maybe they don't even care anymore. But something's going to kick off here anytime soon.
Yeah, I think they're going through the motions. To them, it's just theater, just like the phony rigged elections. Yeah, at this point, it almost seems like they no longer care if people are aware of what they're doing. I mean, the way they stole the election from Le Pen was just incredibly obvious. And a listener reminded me back when they were talking about, before the French elections got underway, we had a caller into the show that said it's impossible to rig a French election because they used those paper ballots. Well, they found a way to do it. And yeah,
and why would a torn ballot be nullified? That makes no sense at all.
Yeah, but that is the law. That is the law.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. People are talking about 9/11. I just want to mention I'm a licensed elevator mechanic, and I know there was an elevator company that had the contract for the Twin Towers, and it was this small company that came out of nowhere. And you would never give a big contract like that to a small outfit. And then they disappeared after the 9/11 event. So there's one more layer. If you're going to take down a building, you have complete access to the core through the elevator shafts, and you can work off of the car tops. You can operate the elevator from the top of the car, and that's your core strength of a building. Just want to, that was it. Just a little side note there. Thanks, Mike.
I was unaware of that, but it would make sense that, again, the cutter charges that are seen in the photographs of the wreckage are of that core assembly, because the building was built with a strong core and the floors were cantilevered out. And very little of the load was actually carried by those outside walls.
I love it. Time Magazine cover. It's beautiful. They shot themselves in the foot. There's a cover photo with the shaved charge beam. I love it. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So we're talking about the economy here. And as I keep telling you, forget what the corporate media is telling you or the government is telling you about how wonderful the economy is and we're in a recovery and everybody ought to be happy, and if you're going hungry and you're without a job, it's all your fault, really. But I think a good example of just how bad things are in this country can be found in Baltimore. And there's a very telling story over at Zero Hedge, basically talking about how it wasn't that long ago when Baltimore was considered one of our model cities. It was a show place, and now here we are with buildings closed everywhere, abandoned buildings, drug addicts just lying in the streets, and it's just a rotting, decaying shell of the metropolis it used to be, and we're seeing that all over the country. Detroit, Chicago. We are a nation in decline. We're being strangled to death by the wartime economy. And we're going to lose this war. Okay, let's take some more phone calls. Michael in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. Mike, first of all, I want to say God bless you. I stopped listening to Alex Jones and all those other alt-writers. They're full of, hogwash. I just want to talk about 9/11 really quick. And, Mike, it's the Jews, bro. It's absolutely the Jews.
Okay.
They control everything.
All right. There's a rule that we have here on this show. If you want to criticize an individual or a government, that's fine. But sweeping generalizations about the Jews this, the blacks that, the Hispanics that, we don't go there. As far as we can tell, yes, Mossad may have been involved, along with the Bush administration. But we don't make these sweeping things about, okay, that's the rules.
Okay.
Okay.
Michael, Larry Silverstein, he's a Jew. I mean, a majority of them are Jews. The New World Order is Jewish, no?
Okay, hang on. Thank you very much. If you want to talk about Larry Silverstein, yes. Fine. Them's the rules. All right, James in Japan, Ohio gozaimasu, o genki desu ka?
Ohio gozaimasu, Michael. Hey, Mike, you had a really cool caller the other day. He was from, like, Ukraine. No, he lived in Ukraine.
Yes.
But he's not living there anymore. And I really enjoyed that call, and I really hope that guy calls in a lot in your show again because he was really fascinating.
He had a lot of good information.
Yeah, he had a great information. I was just like the interaction between you two was like really fascinating, and I just found it. I just really enjoyed it, and I just hope whoever the hell he is, he calls back again to your show because I think you really added a lot of value to it.
Okay, well, thank you. Hopefully he's listening.
Yeah, I hope so. Hey, Mike, as far as Colbert, yeah, I don't like what he says either, but I'm a great believer in free speech. You know, I think he should say whatever the hell he wants, but put some kind of thing on his show like parental guidance up to 17 years old or something like that. But
well, let me back up here. Let me back up here a little bit because a lot of people have a misconception about our right to freedom of speech, and there is a reasonable limit in that the First Amendment is there to protect the truth from those in power who are afraid of the truth. The First Amendment was never intended to protect lies and liars. And Colbert knowingly made inaccurate statements, and then he made it personal with that homophobic comment, and that basically indicated malice was at work. And so I agree with those who say Colbert is at legal jeopardy from what he did. And again, if you're going to have freedom of speech, along with that comes the responsibility that you will think about what you're going to say very carefully before you say it.
Yeah, have some responsibility before you say stuff. I believe that. Hey, as far as fans, I think they voted just to like eradicate their own people. I don't know, like how. I don't even know what is going through these people's heads.
Greed, unbridled greed, partisanship, turf wars. Like I said earlier in the show, our Congress is so caught up in all this partisan bickering, they certainly cannot be doing their actual job. And that's another reason this nation is descending into chaos.
And lastly, I'm going back to Russia next week.
Okay.
Next time I'll try and get a souvenir for the lovely lady Claire. I didn't think she'd like the same souvenir I gave you, so I have to get something more feminine. But I've got to tell you, Russia is a nice place, man. Like, I was warned not to go on the back streets and stuff in Vladivostok, but...
well, you'd get that same warning here in Honolulu.
Yeah, everywhere. Pretty much everywhere. But, yeah, I'll get something nice for Claire. And this time I'm renting like a loft in there. It's like only $500 a month, and it has like everything: kitchen and washer, dryer, internet. So yeah, I'll send some for the lady Claire this time. And I don't know, I'm not good at buying stuff for women, but I'm gonna give it a shot. But that's it. And hope you have a good day, Mike.
All right. Well, if it'll make you feel any better, she has been wearing that T-shirt.
All right, man.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you mentioned the retail stocks plummeting today, and then I just had to check over on dryships.com, and that's where I check for the Baltic Dry Index every day usually. And, of course, that number is up by 7 points. So we know this number has also been tweaked quite a bit too, along with the plunge protection and quantitative easing for the markets. This is another number we can't actually rely on, but we should be able to, but we can't. They're tweaking this number too. If the stocks are plummeting, and we're showing the Baltic Dry Index is at 1012, which is a rise of 7 points, it doesn't kind of go with the 4.4% unemployment, wouldn't you say?
Well, it all depends. I mean, if there's a sudden shipment in the raw materials needed to produce explosives and gun propellant, obviously that sector of the economy is doing very, very well, and they need to import the raw materials. So I'm not ready to just say the number is being tinkered with. What I want to see is, what kinds of cargoes are accounting for that 7-point rise.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Hey, another thing I wanted to quickly talk about it was you said the UK leaving the Brexit and leaving the European Union and voting for Brexit. If somebody wanted to keep you on the same system, keep you indebted, how would they go about keeping the UK under the old European Union? Probably carry out some false flags, probably get the country involved in some kind of conflict where they could not leave. Do you think it's a possibility we might be seeing more false flags in the UK?
We could, but again, right now it looks like, first of all, Brussels keeps putting ever more unrealistic demands on Great Britain to leave. They're literally charging them a divorce payment, if you will. And again, it looks like the Remainers are going to try and hijack that election in June to try and get rid of the Brexiteers and basically deal with that. Try and get a new vote through Parliament with a pro-Remain Parliament and just say, it's all over, no more Brexit.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that actually to be very realistic happening. I really do. I don't think that they will actually escape. I think they'll be staying on the European Union. I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't care what the people say. The power brokers have made the decision, and they are going to tweak this somehow, some way.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, the New World Order, the globalists, are so close to their dream of a single planet with a single golden throne and a single private central bank. At this point, they're not going to quit. They're not going to pull back.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch to Charlie in Los Angeles. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing today?
Doing okay.
Hey, I got a question for you. Well, not a question. First of all, we know that the Jewish community gets all upset anytime you insult them about anything, whether it's the Holocaust or whatever. But then why in Las Vegas, where that's basically the Jewish community that built that town, uses Krupp Siemens elevator service?
Okay.
We know that Alfred Krupp and Siemens were the biggest boosters of Hitler, and I always wondered why that was when I would see these Krupp Siemens vans and all these hotel parking lots servicing the elevators. Just kind of how does that happen situation? I mean, I'm just thinking,
Well, I mean,
it's not Otis elevators.
Well, there's Otis as well. We don't know what was in which company got the contract for the World Trade Towers. But this far after World War II, I mean, the reasonable person is going to say, okay, yeah, we got to stop carrying a grudge. BMW, during World War II, they were manufacturing aircraft engines for the German fighters, and yet today people don't say we're not going to buy BMWs because they're linked back to the Nazis. And well, even when I was young, how popular the Volkswagen Beetle was, and that was one of the signature accomplishments of the Nazi government, a people's car. Everybody could afford one of these cars, and they were very simple, very easy to maintain, and I loved my Beetle.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I mean, I just found, it's like there's plenty of elevator companies, Otis, and, then you see Krupp Siemens, and I used to talk to the Krupp Siemens employees who were on my table, and some of those people were Jewish. And I just could never figure out how could that happen, considering, Alfred Krupp and Siemens were, if you look in any history books, were the biggest villains behind Hitler.
Again, that was so long ago. I think probably a lot of people just don't care anymore. A lot of people just don't care anymore.
No, but so was the Holocaust. Holocaust was so long ago, too.
Yeah, and I'm ready to forget that as well, but, obviously there's a political agenda that can take advantage of that, and so they're going to keep running it up. Anyway, listen, Charlie, we're coming up now on a commercial break, and I'm going to have to let you go, and we'll be back after these few words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now then, interesting little story here. Somebody's actually been doing a study of all these refugees pouring into Europe, and they've discovered only 13% of them are from Syria. And this completely undermines the entire claim that the borders must be open to take in these war refugees. Only 13% of them are from Syria, and we don't know what percentage of those are actually fleeing the war as opposed to looking for a better place to live. But as they pour on in and pour on in and pour on in, Europe is not such a great place to live as it used to be. It's all being pulled down to the lowest common denominator. Now, here in the United States of America, political correctness is starting to get a little bit dizzy, if you were. At the American University in Washington, D.C., a group of black student demonstrators protested, demanding a sanctuary for people of color, as well as an extension on their final exams in response to an alleged hate crime, and they got it. They now have a blacks-only area at the Bridge Cafe. Now, can you imagine what would happen if somebody said, we want a whites-only area and any place on the campus, the Bridge Cafe, anywhere else. We want a whites-only area. Oh, it's racist, it's this, it's that, it's Jim Crow, it's the KKK. Now, Tommy Curry is a professor at Texas A&M. He teaches radical black philosophies, and he just demonstrated how radical it is because he's come on out saying it's time that black people should talk openly about murdering white people. And in an interview he said the murder of white people may be necessary for black liberation. Said that white people need to fear blacks so much they believe death could come for them at any moment. That's actually pretty radical out there. Is this what colleges and universities have turned into? It's a little bit out there. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Wes in Idaho, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael, who was it that said to determine who rules you, who can you not criticize?
Well, it's attributed to Voltaire, but they don't think it was really him. But the quote basically goes to learn who rules over you, learn who you may not criticize.
Who said it then?
They're not sure. It's attributed to Voltaire, but they're not sure that it was really him.
Do you think that's a true statement then?
Yeah, very much so. I think it very much is a true statement.
I just got 5 new books today by R. Vincent Burt. Have you read this book? It's called It's the Jews Stupid Who and What Are the Evil
Wes.
Oh, we can't. Oh, that's right. We can't criticize them.
No. We can't use generalizations. I mean, if you want to talk about Netanyahu, that's fine. You want to talk about Silverstein, that's fine. But I don't want to get into this other stuff. And it doesn't matter whether it's Jewish or black or Hispanic, okay? Because otherwise we're down in that same area as that Texas A&M professor talking about all whites this and all whites that. Okay? We don't want to go down that path of gross generalizations. If you want to criticize an individual or a government, that is what this program is for. So, anyway, now, down in Houston, Texas, there's been an interesting story involving a drive-by shooting. Apparently, a homeowner in his home was the target of 3 criminals in a drive-by shooting that drove by the front of his house, firing into his house over 40 times, not hitting the homeowner. The homeowner responded, firing back and shooting all 3 suspects, killing 2, using an AR-15. So anybody who's out there among the gun grabbers saying you don't need an AR-15 to defend your home, this is the counterexample right there. Because had he been using a shotgun, probably would have had no effect at that range. Same thing with a handgun. This is a classic case of allowing the American people to have the same arms as the criminals. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to talk about computers and software and malware. And the latest one coming on out, there is a phishing, smishing scam, actually, that's circulating this week. And basically what it is you will get a text message that appears to be from NatWest Bank asking you to verify your account details. You click on the link. It takes you to what looks like NatWest's website. And, of course, when you type in your banking details, scammers get access to all of your money. And it is rather amazing to see the U.S. government go on about the threat of terrorism and the threat of this and the threat of that. The biggest threat to the American people right now is this out-of-control tsunami of cybercrime, and nobody seems interested in dealing with that. Now, interesting story out of Journal Neo, the imperative of replacing Google and Facebook. And it's talking about how other nations around the world are now telling their own domestic populations to find alternatives to Google and Facebook because of the very obvious pro-America propagandizing and filtering going on in both of those social media platforms. And so we're starting to see the rise of locally produced search engines and social media sharing platforms. We have some here in the U.S. like Scene Life and Gab and VK and so forth that are coming on, and they're starting to capture a larger and larger share of the market. And now we have governments around the world that are telling their own populations, do not use Google and Facebook because you're going to be getting information that the government of the United States of America wants you to see, and you will not get the information the government of the United States of America does not want you to see. Now, apparently over at New York University, they had a little bit of a whoopsie. This was reported over in The Intercept. Apparently one of the programs they have on the campus involves encryption. It's a government contract, and it is supposedly a new generation of supercomputer-enabled code-breaking systems to go after mathematically based codes, which are still very much at the heart of public key cryptography. And apparently somebody left all this code, the source code, for this software exposed to the entire Internet. And they have no way of knowing if somebody's already copied it off. Apparently the project was called Windsor Green, and it's a system designed to excel at the sort of complex mathematics that underlies modern encryption. And so that may now be out there as well. Now, the encryption that I came up with in my challenges to the NSA was not mathematically based, it was logically based. The mathematic-based encryption, there's always a weakness in that it is mathematically based. And if you can figure out the math, you can figure out the code. But one of these days I'll get around to coming up with a public key version of the 10,000 Monkeys code. Over in Great Britain, their largest union for school teachers is now boycotting Hewlett-Packard Computers over the company's role in the Israeli occupation. More than 21,000 people in Great Britain have also signed a pledge to boycott the U.S. headquartered firm. And they're saying it's a gesture of solidarity with the Palestinian people. They're not going to be buying Hewlett-Packard equipment. Now, Hewlett-Packard under Carly Fiorina left a bad taste in my mouth, so I tend not to buy their stuff anyway, but this will send a message. Speaking of HP, apparently an audio driver installed on some Hewlett-Packard laptops was found to have a keylogger built into it. Records all the user's keystrokes and saves the information to a local file accessible to anyone or any third-party software or malware that knows where to look. Swiss cybersecurity firm Mod0 discovered the keylogger on April 28th, made the findings public today. The question is this the audio driver supplied by Hewlett-Packard on the laptop, or is it an aftermarket product? It sounds to me like it's inherent to the Hewlett-Packard. And we've been hearing from all kinds of places where tablets and smartphones and laptops are being sold with malware already in them at the point of sale. How much of this is criminal activity versus how much of this is government snooping on you? We don't know. But it is rather alarming that our own appliances are being weaponized against us and against our right to privacy. Now, over the years, I have bashed Microsoft quite a bit, and sometimes they did, in fact, really deserve it. But they've done something really wonderful, and so this is where we get to come on back and say, way to go, Microsoft. They have developed a watch that vibrates, that alleviates hand tremors of people who have Parkinson's disease. It's called the Emma watch, named after the Parkinson's sufferer it was designed for, and it was showcased at Microsoft's Build 2017 conference in Seattle. And it's still a prototype, but I can imagine they're probably going to sell a lot of these things. It sends tiny vibrations into the wearer's wrist that disrupt this feedback loop between the brain and the hand that causes the tremors. And this is a wonderful technology, and it reminds me about a system that was developed quite a while ago to deal with people who stammer. And it was simply a microphone and a headset, and when other people were talking around you, you heard them just fine. But when you were talking, the system would play white noise into your ear, so you couldn't hear your own voice. And that would stop people from stammering because their brain was caught in a loop between speaking and listening to themselves speak, and that was what was causing the stammering. So this appears to be a technique that could have a wider range of applications than previously thought. But again, when Microsoft does it right, they do it right. This is an absolutely amazing development, and I certainly hope it will be made available to Parkinson's sufferers very, very soon. Now, speaking of watches, on the other side, apparently the Apple Watch has a bit of a problem. There is a function called Hold to Auto Call, and by default it's set to 911. And apparently people, when they lean on the button, they're accidentally calling 911, and apparently it resulted in 130,000 erroneous, mistaken calls to 911 last year. Now, those 911 switchboards are not infinite, and if they're dealing with somebody who's more or less finger dialed them or butt dialed them, then the line may be busy for somebody who's got a real emergency. Fortunately, it is possible to turn the hold to auto call function off or to have it on a different number. But if you have an Apple Watch, you might want to think about either shutting it off or have the auto call directed to a different number, like your home number or your broker or something like that. But that's something you may want to look out for. Sometimes they make the devices just a little too clever. Now, there is a little bit of good news out here. Apparently, Corboom Communications was a cold calling firm, and they were calling people sometimes at night to see if they were eligible for road accident or PPI compensation and so forth. And it breached privacy laws by calling people without their consent. This is in Great Britain. And they got hit with a record £400,000 fine by the Information Commissioner's Office for making almost 100 million nuisance calls. And it put the company into bankruptcy. And boy, would I like to see a lot of that here in the United States because of all the telemarketer calls from all these companies who, one way or the other, ignore or get around the do not call list. And a lot of these American call center companies, they'll have the actual call center outside the United States, so that technically they're not controlled by the do not call list. And then they'll call back in and they'll sell you insurance or whatever. And it really is very angering that the do not call list is not actually being enforced. And it really ought to be, especially for people who are on a metered cell phone service. These telemarketing calls are adding to your bill. Now, apparently there is another lawsuit cranking on up over the Samsung Galaxy Note 7 S7 and the S7 Edge, and apparently the Edge has also developed a security hole as well, where apparently a rather large number of these lithium batteries are overheating and catching fire and causing damage and injury. And I think this does exceed the limitations of indemnification. One thing when it simply stops working, but when it's setting fire to your home, that's something else entirely. Now, you're probably wondering what's been going on over at the Dakota Access Pipeline ever since the water defenders were driven off and the pipeline was allowed to be completed, even though there were apparently some deficiencies in the right-of-way. But it's an oil company, and the oil companies will rule. And so the Standing Rock Sioux tribe have issued a statement basically saying that even though the Dakota Access Pipeline is not carrying anywhere near its planned capacity, they are already finding leaks all the way along the pipeline, getting into the water supply on which 17 million people are dependent, which was exactly the issue that they were raising over the placement of this pipeline across their tribal land. All right, let's talk about Hanford. The official word from Hanford is there was no radiation leak. We are now starting to hear from other parties around the area that, yes, there was a radiation release. Nobody's saying how much. And apparently Tuesday, the Emergency Operations Center was activated to basically deal with the aftermath of this. And again, as we reported yesterday, the tunnel that collapsed had a history of issues. They were warned that these tunnels were not safe. They needed to be reinforced, and nothing was done because the money needs to go for bombs and bullets. So far, the entire repair has consisted of just pouring dirt into the hole, which absolutely is not a seal against escaping radioisotopes. But we seem to be in this era where every time there's one of these disasters, they don't solve it, they just make it look like it's gone away. When the Deepwater Horizon blew up in the Gulf of Mexico, they poured all this highly toxic Corexit on the oil. It was called a dispersant. It's nothing of the kind. It causes the oil molecules to rearrange so it becomes denser than water and sinks to the bottom. All that oil that you used to see on the top of the Gulf of Mexico is now on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, where all the crabs and flounders and other bottom-feeding fish are being contaminated by it. Same thing here at Hanford. Just pour dirt on it, pretend it wasn't a problem. So let's talk about human-caused global warming. Apparently, the surprise snow that we had last month actually increased the mountain snowpack over in Wyoming. And they're saying the ski resorts are already closed for the season, but people were heading up into the mountains for any place they could find. And there was snowing and snowboarding going on. Winter's back, as it were. Over in Utah, the Department of Transportation crews are still trying to cut through the deep snow to get those mountain passes open. And apparently it is slow going over there. Back on the 8th, Monday, they had a freak hailstorm in Denver. Had these golf ball-sized hailstones coming on down. And it piled up so deep, some cars couldn't be moved. I mean, it was up around the cars. They were practically buried. Apparently, last night, the national cold record in Latvia was broken. They've set a new all-time cold weather record for this day of the year for the entire country. And, of course, as you know, Barack Obama got a huge chunk of cash traveling to Milan, Italy, for a climate change conference. And as we have seen with all these champions of the environment, he flew in a private jet and then went from the airport into the venue for the conference in a 14-car convoy. Talk about climate change, human-caused global. There is a warning out that, and let me back up here and preface this. Yesterday we were talking about how there was a problem with the runoff from pharmaceutical companies, the untreated waste materials pouring into the water supply, included vast amounts of antibiotics, and as a result, we're starting to see life forms evolve antibiotic resistance in the wild. So now, according to the story out of Natural News, there is a superbug fungus starting to invade U.S. hospitals in New York and New Jersey, and none of the existing drugs have any effect against this fungus. It would be nice if they would nod to the homeopathic people and try oregano oil, which is really good against fungus. But it is a nasty situation. The more we treat illnesses with these synthetic chemicals, the more these pathogens are going to evolve to tolerate them. We're already seeing it with the glyphosate, Roundup. The pests and the weeds that glyphosate was supposed to kill, they're developing their own glyphosate resistance. So the farmers are stuck with the GMO seeds, and they're having to go back to using traditional chemical pesticides to control the weeds on their farm. Now, over at the Health Resources and Services Administration, they have released the list of payouts for the Vaccine Injury Court for U.S. fiscal year 2017, which just ended, and they paid out $142 million. And remember, the vaccine court is biased in favor of the vaccine manufacturers. And so they had enough people come on in with absolute proof of vaccine damage. They paid out $142 million. Now, the Boston Herald has gone on the warpath, trying to dehumanize parents concerned about vaccine safety, and actually going as far as to say that anti-vaccine speech ought to be a hanging offense. Because measles are bad, measles can kill. Actually, measles has only killed one person in the last half century, and that person had just had the measles vaccine. The measles vaccine kills 10 times as many people, counting that one. But it's all about pushing product, getting you to buy things you may not need, may not want. And again, we don't have the money in the first place. So they're just going to flog us harder. All right, we're going to be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about medical issues and vaccinations. And apparently over in Sweden, their parliament has decided that forced vaccinations violate the constitutional rights of the Swedish people. And considering how progressive and liberal Sweden has become, this sends a very strong signal. They recognize that there is a fundamental right to decide what goes in your body. That is your right, not the government's right, not the school's right, your right to decide. All right, we're going to take one more phone call. Nico in Southern California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, nui nui. I had posted an article this morning on the website regarding a study that was done, homeschooled kids versus non-homeschooled kids with regard to vaccines and illness. Did you see that?
Yeah, and we posted it ourselves a couple of days ago, and basically it said that overall vaccinated children are a lot less healthy. They're more prone to all kinds of illnesses. Again, we have that lawsuit against Merck for the shingles vaccine, which is causing shingles in the people. And there's this horrific story that was over in Natural News where apparently an FDA-approved anti-seizure medication was given to this 26-year-old graduate student, and it caused her skin to literally melt. And I saw the before and after pictures, and it's horrific. And apparently it happened to other people, and this woman has joined a lot of people who are suing GlaxoSmithKline for millions of dollars in medical costs over this horrifying damage. And remember, the FDA approved this medication.
Well, it's my understanding that the laws were changed in the last 5-10 years where the FDA can be paid to speed through the approval of certain medicines.
Well, it's not just that. It's the fact that the FDA doesn't do its own tests anymore. It relies on the testing information provided by the pharmaceutical manufacturer.
Well, yeah, that's kind of like relying on CrowdStrike to, take a look at Hillary's computer. It's all, it's all, it's all crooked. But, this article that, looking at the rough numbers, 30 times as likely for vaccinated children to have allergies, 22 times as likely for them to require allergy medication, 4 times as likely to have early learning disabilities, 300 times more likely to have ADHD. The article that I posted actually has a link to the study itself if you want to look at the numbers.
Okay, well, the numbers are horrific here, and of course, all of them are conditions that lead to the sale of more medications and treatments. It's money, 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 money.
Hey, before I go, what is your shirt size? I know, you and I made that shirt that's the, all I got was this lousy T-shirt, and I wanted to send one to you.
Well, I'm a large, and I already got one through the Cafe Press store. And by the way, times for a little personal gloat here. As you know, I've been trying to lose weight for a couple of years. I hit 199 this morning. I'm down under 200, and I started at 285 when I started the diet. So, huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. I'm going to order a big pizza to celebrate. There's the music. It's time for us to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, with the lovely Lady Claire here on Republic Broadcasting. Until then, take what you learn, share it with everybody. We need to get the word on out. And we'll talk to you tomorrow. Aloha, America.